Hi, this is for Advanced Higher Geography pupils doing map work, and hopefully you have watched this series of videos in order. And so we're right at the end of the unit, and we're looking at other map work questions that kind of focus on, in quotes, other land uses. We've dealt with settlement, we've dealt with tourism, we now have a kind of the rest of them to look at. So looking across the exam papers over the last few years, you'll see that there are questions that focus on these land uses. This is not an exclusive list, and it doesn't mean to say that something else might appear, but hydroelectric power is a useful thing to know about and is drawn from the higher course in river basin management. Forestry, you've been previously assessed in at National 5 and also has some relevance in the higher course. Settlement I've already dealt with in a separate video on settlement because it's quite detailed. Flooding, agriculture, transport are other areas which we might explore in this video or in class. And then tourism. Tourism lends itself particularly well to exam questions, and it's used multiple times. So I've done a special sequence of lessons on tourism. So I'm going to deal with a few of these in this video, these more unusual land uses, just to give you the background on how to deal with questions on those topics should they arise. Alright, so here's an example of a multiple land use question. You're being asked to analyse the factors which have influenced the different land uses around Ullswater. It's only 4 marks, and that gives you an indication about the level of detail that you're going to need here. You are, of course, going to need map evidence. That map evidence will need to be robust and detailed, but we're looking for a good analytical paragraph about maybe 4 different land uses. So my approach to this question would be to take a note of the mark value and the question wording. Multiple land uses are referenced for 4 marks, so we obviously need to be picking on multiple land uses. Brief, well-evidenced paragraphs would be the way to go with this. The reason I'm starting with this question in this video is because it actually covers a lot of ground of what you need to revise. So we're going to look at transport, we're going to look at agriculture, we're going to look at forestry, and we're going to look at a little bit of tourism in this case study. We'll also address some settlement. Tourism settlement I've done in detail elsewhere, but those 3 land uses you see there, transport, agriculture and forestry, we can talk about in some detail, and it reminds you that they are worth revising. It's worth pulling your notes from National 5 and higher off the shelf and revising the factors that influence the location of farm types, forestry and transportation. You're explaining reasons why these land uses are where they are. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. The A592 is there because it connects Patterdale to tourist facilities. Would be a tempting sentence for you to write. It looks right at first glance. The A592 is there because it connects to Patterdale and to tourist facilities, but that actually isn't the reason why the A592 has been built where it has been built, and that's what we're being asked. The A592 is there because the land is flatter on the north shore of the lake. It follows the contours of the landscape. This is more relevant, and therefore we could expect to be considered for a mark here. Take note of those last 2 sentences, read them carefully because it's important for you to be able to distinguish the difference between the first and the second, why the first really isn't relevant and why the second really is. Okay, so let's work through these one at a time. Starting off with Woodland. This question is in the 2018 paper, so if you download that you can get a copy of the map for yourself. So Woodland. Let's start off with that. There's a variety of woodland types around Ullswater. That's one of the first things that you'll notice. There's deciduous and there's coniferous, and these are found on the steeper slopes where other land uses aren't so economically viable. That mark is directly drawn, in my opinion, from the National 5 course. You were writing sentences like that back and forth here. You do, of course, need to make it robust with good quality map evidence, but this is knowledge that should definitely be familiar to you. Trees are used to stabilise thin soil on steep slopes, and they'll reduce runoff into Ull's water. So all of this is very much within the scope of that which we have already learned about woodland. It can survive in poor soils, it can survive at high altitudes, it can survive in cold temperatures, it can survive on a northern aspect, it can survive and hold together soils on steep slopes, it can survive in quite acidic thin soils. All of these things will be relevant to the map that is currently on the screen. And all of them explain why there is forestry where we find it. You could also identify the fact that this forestry here appears to be have been felled, and that kind of explains its location a little bit. Maybe this is plantation, whereas this forestry here, which is managed, and we can tell that by the colour of it, has no boundary, and it's maybe more of a natural forest. But here this has a boundary fence around it, and its sharp edges indicate that it's has either been planted or has perhaps had sections felled, and that also gives us an indication as to why forestry is where the forest is. In other words, the forest is there, perhaps this forest is here as part of somebody's industrial process. Okay. Agriculture. There's lots to be said on agriculture, more than I have time for here without going into extraordinary detail. But you should revise your National 5 agriculture notes. Flat land is always more appropriate to arable farming, crop-based farming. Flat land in floodplains, taking advantage of alluvial soils, also is going to be beneficial. And so if you can find a farm that's on a flat bit of land near a river, you've got lots to talk about there. It's flat, it's easy for machinery, it's easy to harvest the crops and to plant the crops. It's lower down, so it's warmer. It's more appropriate for delicate plants to survive. And on a floodplain, the floodplain will have alluvial soils from the flooding, which improves the fertility of the soil. That said, you might wish to talk about sheep farming, and there's some good examples of map evidence to support this area being agriculture, and that's key. You need to find evidence of the area having agriculture. And on the map you see here there's several examples. So first of all, you can see the word sheepfold. Sheepfold is a structure in which sheep shelter, and sometimes they're historical features of the landscape, but nonetheless they indicate that the area is being used for sheep farming. And sheep can survive on rough, open ground at high altitude. They can survive in the cold. They don't require good quality soil or fodder, or that means grass, up at that altitude. And where climate and soils would, as you can see down here, restrict other types of farming. So your understanding from National 5 farming here is going to actually be really useful to you. Another little bit of map evidence that tells us this area has been used for farming isn't just the word sheepfold. Obviously you would look for the word farm, or the FM, the symbol for farm on the map. But another good clue to look for are these field systems. These are walls that are dividing the countryside up into fields, field boundaries, and that's an indication that this is a farming landscape. Okay. Here you can see some examples of what I've just been describing. So there's a farm, here's our field system boundaries indicating that this area is used for farming. All you need to do is offer reasons why. It's very flat, it's lower down, it's sheltered, and this river here would add alluvium to the floodplain, increasing the fertility of the soil. And that would be what you would need to say in order to score that mark. Bringing it back to the question, this is one paragraph for one mark. Obviously you would spot 4 different land uses, get 1 mark for each land use, and that would be you at full marks. Moving on to transport. Transportation routes tend to follow the easiest route across the landscape. So that includes where the land is flat. You're more likely to find roads and railways because they take advantage of that. Not only is it easier for transport to move along the road if the road is flat, but it's easier to construct the road. Also, you could mention that this road here is clearly following the contours of the landscape. That's a nice thing to know about, and that in the same way makes it easier to construct and easier to drive along. The road also follows a nice visual route. It's a pleasant route with its views over Ullswater, and the road sits above that 150 contour. It doesn't sit exactly on the shoreline. It sits slightly above it, using as much of this flat area of space as possible. Be alive to where things are not on the map. For example, here there is no road constructed to the southern side of the Ullswater, and that's because there's no flat land here. So you can make that kind of comparative point. So this shore has the advantage in road construction. River valley floors would be another thing that you could look for with explaining why roads are found where roads are found. Or looking at the surface drainage. As the area got a lot of marshland, bogland and surface drainage, maybe that's a reason why there are no roads in those areas, and you'll find that roads tend to be built up on embankments if they are passing through areas like that, and that explains why they are where they are. Finally, we're at settlement, and here I think it would probably be the last of the land uses that I would try and explain. They're built on valley floors. They're clearly at the meeting places of two different valley floors. Here moving from the west and here moving from the south, and that would be a communicative joining point in the past, where people would have they would have driven their cattle along those valley floors perhaps, and that would have made Glenridding an ideal place for people to meet at a market. Also, this shoreline location is ideal for the use of the resources that Ullswater brings. Access to the forestry on the eastern shore, for example. They both take advantage of the shelter that the valley provides. Essentially, it's a miniature site and situation question, really. I don't think either Patterdale or Glenridding have defensive locations or anything fancy like that. But Glenridding does have a southern-facing aspect, and that would make it pleasant and warm. So you can stick with quite basic geography to explain multiple land uses. And this question is a really good one to look back over if you want to try it for yourself, because it asks you to look at multiple land uses at the same time. I am going to focus on another one that's another specific one. In this question, we're looking at the suitability of an area to a hydropower scheme. When you're talking about HEP, you could use your notes from the River Basin Management Unit of the higher course. If you weren't taught the River Basin Management Unit of the higher course, then you should consult the notes that are found elsewhere on this website. Here basically are the requirements that hydroelectric power needs. When you're doing a hydroelectric power, what you're doing is you're blocking a valley with a wall and you're capturing water behind it. The water builds up, and the pressure of that built up water can then be allowed to flow through a turbine, that's a fan, at the bottom of the concrete wall, which makes it spin and create energy. So we need a narrow valley that can be easily blocked up with a wall, known as a dam. We need a steep gradient, so the water has more energy, potential energy behind it. And that, of course, the steep gradient generates more energy. You want impermeable geology, so the water doesn't drain away. The way you evidence that on your map is either to use your atlas, which may have a geology map in it, or is to look at the presence of surface drainage. If you've got lots of streams running over the surface, that is reasonable map evidence to suggest that the geology underneath is impermeable, i.e. that water is not just infiltrating and percolating away down through the ground. And you probably want to have a good supply of local streams to resupply your reservoir. In terms of access, and I'm broadly following our site access and situation structure from previous questions here, you're going to need to have some access. You're going to need at least a 4-meter road or track for access for construction materials and maintenance. So you will need some infrastructure there. And finally, situation. Make sure you're checking for the absence of land use conflicts. You don't want your reservoir to be flooding areas where wildlife might be sensitive. You don't want to ruin anyone's view, anything like that. So just be alert to that. And of course, last but not least, as is so common in questions of this nature, climate. Are you is it an area of high precipitation? Because that's clearly going to be relevant to filling up a reservoir with rainwater. Okay, I think I'll probably stop there once I've shown you the model answer to this, that is. You can see here on the map that the evidence for surface, that we can see the evidence for surface drainage. We can see that the valley is steep, and we can see, using the contours, we can see that we've got the smaller tributaries feeding the main river at this location. We can see that the altitude is very high. We can use our atlas to prove how much precipitation we get, and that'll score us a mark. We can point out that the site directly lies on a bridleway, which may need to be widened to allow access for vehicles. We've not got a road leading up to this point, so we're using this green pathway, but we're having to adapt it, so we've recognised that in the question. We've got a few buildings nearby, notably the one labelled Filter House, but the villagers down in Hartsop, which is down at the bottom of the hill here, won't be able to see your project, so that's good, so there's less planning objections. However, the people who might do fishing on this lake here might be disturbed by the sounds of construction or the sounds of the machinery in operation. Lastly, it is in a national park, and that could result in planning consent being difficult to obtain. And right there, for this last point here, that shows you the value of checking to see if you're in a national park, because if you are, it's such an easy mark to score. Okay, continuing into land use impacts, I'm just debating whether to... Yes, I think I'll quickly go through this one. If we're explaining how impacts may have an impact on the surrounding area, we've looked at the impacts of tourism before, but you could be asked about the social and economic impacts of almost anything, any kind of land use. So here are some key notes that you want to take on board. For social and economic impacts, if you're building let's just call it a business, I'm not even going to spend too much time talking about the actual question here, which is about the construction of a new kind of arena for concerts and stuff like that. But let's just call it Business X. And if you are constructing a business in an area, it's going to have a positive employment impact for local people, i.e. it will provide jobs. You might even be able to talk about how if there are local universities and colleges, they would be benefited because their graduates can find skilled employment. It depends what the case study is. In this case study, it's an arena, so there's not that many skilled jobs there, but maybe you're being asked to set up a factory. So it depends on the context of the question. But nonetheless, you're definitely going to be providing employment opportunities. You're also going to be providing competition for businesses that are already in the area, and that's quite a good mark to score if you can find a valid way of justifying it using map evidence. I would need to find some kind of other venue in the area for me to score that mark. There'll be a multiplier effect. What that means is that when I set up my concert venue, or whatever business it is, Business X, it's going to generate more wealth in the area, it's going to attract more people to the area, those people will spend their money in the area, and that money will filter out into surrounding businesses within the community. That's the multiplier effect. Some other less used but useful things to think about when you're revising this kind of question is the concept of industrial inertia. Industrial inertia is when one industry, let's say Business X that we are setting up, makes use of the skills of already established businesses in the area. So if you're setting up a car factory and there are already car factories in the area, it's reasonable to assume that there is a local pool of people who are experienced in the production of cars, who have knowledge in the production of cars, who have the relevant training. There will be locals and schools, colleges and universities that offer the relevant training. And for want of a better way of saying it, it's in the blood of the area to do that thing. So it's a good location to locate. So finally, another point just to make, and I'm just choosing this juncture to make it, is just-in-time delivery systems may be pertinent. Just-in-time delivery is when you order parts to your business as you need them, so you don't have to stockpile them in a warehouse. And so Amazon is an excellent example of a just-in-time delivery system. And this may be pertinent. The last 2 points about industrial inertia and just-in-time delivery may be relevant. Depends how you use them. But where, for example, your business could have links with other businesses on the map, especially if they're in some kind of manufacturing or in some industrial capacity, then just-in-time delivery systems would be an impact of that, because you would be able to make linkages with those companies, with those other factories, and more wealth could be generated. Of course, all of this is dependent upon what the case study is. In this case, we're dealing with a concert venue, so neither just-in-time delivery nor, I would suspect, industrial inertia would apply here. The multiplier effect certainly would apply. Competition for local businesses could apply, if I can find a suitable example on the map, and positive employment would definitely apply. Environmental, you always want to think, regardless what the example is, about noise pollution. This can occur if you link it to appropriate map evidence. Nearby schools, for example, could be disturbed by construction processes. Also think about visual pollution and air pollution, things like that. Increased traffic to an area may cause localized congestion. Whatever you're building is likely to have people visiting it, so local road networks may experience increased congestion. Try and link the negative impact of that to something that you can find on the map. Again, a local school is not going to benefit from having increased car transport running past it to your business, arena, whatever it is that you're being asked to design. And another environmental impact to discuss is the project on a greenfield and a brownfield site? It's likely to be one or the other, which is useful because you can always then talk about this. A brownfield site is one where previous industry has been destroyed. And you can always comment that your business is going to regenerate that area of the city, and that's a positive thing. If it's on a greenfield site, you could argue that you're actually losing valuable green space and that habitat may be threatened, and so your project needs to take that into account by maintaining wetland and forest habitats within the structure and grounds of the project that you are designing. Okay, I'm just going to run through the actual answer here, and I'm not going to talk about it in any great depth because I'm not sure that's really going to be beneficial. Take a picture of that, take notes from that as you wish, or you can get the 2019 paper and try it for yourself and compare it to this model answer. The most important thing is that you can see how I have reached that answer using these notes. Okay everyone, I hope that was helpful, that little kind of brief tour on how to address other more unique and specialised land uses that may occur in your exam.